Barbara Carter. Yes, Joy Cook is a UNCG alum. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. Welcome to all of our participants. We will get started at 12 o'clock p.m. sharp. We're giving our participants another minute to get on all platforms. We're live streaming from Women in C's Facebook as well as ERA Alliance North Carolina's Facebook. Please stay tuned. We'll get started at 12 noon. Welcome to our first virtual Lunch and Learn of 2021. My name is Joy Cook. I'm founder and CEO of Joy Cook Public Relations Group. But for today, most importantly, I am an active board member for Women in C. I'd like to thank our board chair who is joining us today. And her name is Wendy Washberg. Thank you for having this amazing vision for us to do more virtual events. I'd also like to thank the team at ERA North Carolina Alliance for partnering with us on such a special occasion. Thank you also to Senator Van Dyne, Senator Murdoch, and Mrs. Spinner for also joining us, and we'll begin. A couple of housekeeping things. We are streaming on Facebook Live. You're welcome to tweet using the hashtag Women2021. Also, please don't forget to tag ERA North Carolina Alliance, as well as Women in C in your posts. We are also going to be taking questions live on the social media platforms, as well as questions in the chat using the chat feature and the Q&A feature. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have guest speaker, former Senator Terry Van Dyne. Terry Van Dyne lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and was appointed to serve in the North Carolina State Senate after the death of Martin Nesbitt and won election to a full term following November. She served 2 terms as the minority whip, as well as worked to recruit and elect progressive candidates. She retired from the Senate in 2020 after an unsuccessful bid at lieutenant governor. She is now the VP of Legislation for ERA North Carolina Alliance. Welcome, Senator Van Dyne, and we are so happy to have you. Next, we have Adrienne Spinner. Adrienne is a mom of 2, a community advocate. Her political experience began when she decided to run for her county's Board of Education. Even though she did not win her race, the connections that Adrienne made during her campaign turned out to be invaluable step towards continuing her advocacy. She is a state organizing director of North Carolina Housing Coalition, as well as sits on many boards and commissions. Mrs. Spinner has found her niche in advocating for women and children, people of color, the LGBTQIA community, as well as for public education and environmental justice. Adrienne has found that a loss in the run for school board could lead to a renewed purpose and growing leadership. Her most rewarding role, however, remains still raising her 2 kids, her girls, and young activists. Next, it is great pleasure to introduce State Senator Natalie Murdock. Natalie Murdock is a North Carolina senator, and at the time she was appointed the youngest Black woman in the General Assembly, representing Durham, my hometown. She is the principal at Murdock Anderson Consulting, Atal Strategies, and served as Deputy Communications Director for North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. Natalie has over a decade of experience in economic development and is also serves on the UNC Chapel Hill's Institute for Environment Board and Sustainability Council. Natalie is from Greensboro and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Communication from UNC Chapel Hill, and is also a graduate of Yale Campaign School. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists, and I am excited to turn it over to our co-host, Lori Bunton. I have Lori's bio and would love to share a few words about Lori quickly. Lori is retired pharmaceutical executive and a longtime activist for women's rights. She has spent nearly 28 years working in established companies in as large as Eli Lilly and as small as startups in the biopharmaceutical field. Her career has spanned sales for Planned Parenthood in Tennessee, North Carolina national organizations, as well as she serves as co-president of ERA Alliance. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Lori Bunton, who's going to tell us the state of women's issues and more about ERA Alliance.
Thank you so much, Joy. I'm going to very quickly share my screen. All right. All right, I hope everyone can see my screen. All right, excellent. So again, thank you very much. What I'd like to do over the next 10 minutes is give you a little background on the Equal Rights Amendment. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment and actually share what the text of the ERA is. Pretty straightforward. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And again, sex covers both men and women. So this is really a piece of legislation that's going to benefit all Americans. And the Equal Rights Amendment was actually proposed in 1923. At this moment in time, the only place in the Constitution that mentions women is the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. If you look at the timeline for the Equal Rights Amendment, it was first introduced in 1923 by Alice Paul. A new ERA has been introduced in Congress every year since 1983. What really fired up the stronger efforts was when the Madison Amendment, which was the 27th Amendment, was passed after 203 years. We first began what we called a three-state strategy, where we wanted to get 3 more states because we only had 35 states that actually approved the amendment or from the U.S. House and Senate. The House's approval of the resolution H.R. 38 was passed in March of 2020, and this was a resolution to remove the arbitrary time limit on the Equal Rights Amendment. And it really reflected its judgment that the time limit is not immutable. It also recognizes that for a broad and fundamental principle like the one reflected in the ERA, no time limit is appropriate. The House committee finds no less a need to affirm that principle today than it did in 1972 when it actually increased the time limit to 1982. And we believe that no principle is going to lose its vitality in the years to come. And just as a quick side note, in 2012, Representative Carol Maloney wrote the National Archivist to ask, if 3 more states ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, will you publish the Equal Rights Amendment? And the National Archivist said, yes, I will. So the question comes up over and over again, why do we need an ERA? We need an ERA to clarify the legal status of sex discrimination from the courts, and decisions are still dealing very inconsistently with those claims. It would make sex a suspect classification the way race, religion, and national origin are currently suspect classifications. As I mentioned earlier, the only right guaranteed to women in the US Constitution is the right to vote. The Equal Rights Amendment would require employers to make accommodations for pregnant women in the workplace. Laws that we currently have on the books, because we get this question all the time, don't we have all kinds of laws to protect women? We have Title IX, we have equal pay, we have the Violence Against Women Act. Those laws can be overturned at the whim of any Congress that is sitting, and quite often, like the Violence Against Women Act, may not even be renewed. The Equal Rights Amendment would provide a constitutional basis for claims of gender violence. It would set more realistic legal standards for sex discrimination at work. It would have obligated companies like Hobby Lobby to consider the discriminatory impact of their claim to religious freedom on the women in their company. And finally, the ERA would provide the foundation for strict scrutiny surrounding claims for equal pay. Now, currently, since Virginia ratified the Equal Rights Amendment last year, which I can't believe I'm saying last year now, in 2020, we have 38 states who have ratified. Back in December of 2019, Alabama, Louisiana, Nebraska, Tennessee, and South Dakota filed a lawsuit against the National Archivist. They were basically saying the amendment isn't needed and it would enable the removal of abortion restrictions. The states argue that the deadline for ratification expired in 1982 when only 35 states had signed off. Now, 5 states, including South Dakota, that initially ratified the ERA have since rescinded their decisions. Although, again, 2 other states, Nevada in 2017 and Illinois in 2018, had since ratified. On January 8th, the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, issued an opinion arguing that the deadline set by Congress is binding and that the ERA is no longer pending before the states. Notably, the opinion rejected the conclusion of the 1977 Office of Legal Counsel opinion, which approved the earlier extension of the ERA's ratification deadline. In response, the National Archivist said that the archivist, Daniel Figueroa, would not certify Virginia's ratification or add the ERA to the Constitution until a federal court issues an order. Well, what would the court say? We know that the Supreme Court has in the past ruled on the question on whether or not an amendment has been ratified in a reasonable period of time. They believe it is a political question that's best left in the hands of Congress, not the courts. So the question is, if Congress acts to waive the deadline, would the courts continue to honor that precedent? How much weight would they give to the view of the American people who strongly support the Equal Rights Amendment according to polls? Constitutional law scholar Kathleen Sullivan agrees the timeline is not binding. Article 5 of the Constitution provides no barrier to Congress changing its mind, either eliminating or extending the deadline. And that's not a judicially reviewable decision. That's a political question and not something that a court can come in and second guess. So if Congress were to pass a bill to remove the deadline, then that decision would be final and not reviewable by the courts. Nothing in the Constitution says that ratification must be synchronous, contemporaneous, or bounded within any particular time frame. The next lawsuit came out by an organization called Equal Means Equal with the Yellow Roses and Catherine Whitebrook, and they sued the National Archivist. Now, the plaintiffs filed this action to ensure, this was before Virginia ratified, mind you, to ensure that when Virginia ratified, that the archivist would properly record it and would not improperly remove prior ratifications by any state. So they seek this complaint appropriate with the court orders to ensure that the ERA would be recorded as duly ratified. The ERA-NC Alliance actually did sign on to this lawsuit and the amicus briefs. Weeks after Virginia's ratification, last January 2020, State Attorneys General Herring, Kwame Raoul of Illinois, and Aaron Ford of Nevada filed suit to ensure that the ERA would be added to the Constitution. These three AGs argue that under Article 5 of the Constitution, which sets out the process to amend the Constitution, a proposed constitutional amendment automatically becomes part of the US Constitution as soon as it is ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states. According to the Dean of UC Berkeley School of Law, Erwin Chemerinsky, Congress sets a time limit. Congress can modify the time limit. It's important that the time limit was not in the text of the ERA. It was actually in the preamble before the text of the amendment. It is the amendment that is ratified by the states, not the preamble. If Congress can set the deadline in something other than the text of the amendment, why can't Congress change the deadline if set? In addition to the lawsuits, there have been 13 amici briefs in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. And you can see this is a diverse group of organizations. Each of these is a separate amici brief. The US business, 93 companies as diverse as Apple, Biogen, Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs, Pfizer, PepsiCo have signed on to these briefs. Now, there have been 2 amici briefs filed by organizations against the Equal Rights Amendment. The Eagle Forum, which some of you may remember, was Phyllis Schlafly's organization, and the Susan B. Anthony organization, which is a group of men and women who are against the Roe v. Wade and any legalization of abortion. They've also filed amici briefs against ratification of the ERA. So what is happening? That's always the big questions. So Equal Means Equal filed a written appeal to the Supreme Court, but it was denied October 12th. And they filed that because the federal court in Boston actually dismissed their lawsuit for lack of standing back in September. Now, they have since filed an appeal with the First U.S. District Court in Boston, and they are waiting to hear about that court case. The 2 other lawsuits, or the 1 other lawsuit that was filed, we understand from the ERA Coalition, which is the national coalition, that we may be hearing something as early as Q1 of this year. In addition, the National ERA Coalition and Equal Means Equal have sent a letter to the Biden-Harris administration requesting that they instruct the archivist to publish the Equal Rights Amendment in the first 100 days. And this is hot off the press. The House and Senate will jointly introduce 2 new resolutions to remove the time limit on January 21st, which is very exciting. So to conclude, I have to quote the words of the famous Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may her memory be for a blessing. If I could choose an amendment to add to the Constitution, it would be the Equal Rights Amendment. And I personally would like to have my granddaughter pick up the Constitution and see that she is represented equally with men. Thank you.
Awesome presentation, Lori. That information was not only so rich, it was timely. And I'm so excited that you pointed out and highlighted that the amendment is ratified by the state. And we are blessed to have Senator Natalie Murdock on with us today. Would you please give us some thoughts on ERA, Senator Murdock?
Yes, thank you so much, Joy, and thank you so much, Lori, for that phenomenal introduction and providing that rich history. And proud to serve Durham in District 20 as a state senator, was active with the State ERA Alliance before I was elected to the state Senate. And at 36 years old, am just shocked that we are still fighting to have rights that are explicitly prescribed in our U.S. Constitution. I mean, I don't understand why, in my opinion, it has become, overly politicized. We all know the history of that, but it's pretty simple. As women, we should not have to question if our rights can just be struck down by the courts based on a singular law. We need to really expand that to say it needs to fully be embraced and a part of our U.S. Constitution. I actually was not aware of that quote from Justice Ginsburg, and in her honor, I can't think of a better time for us to continue to push this forward. Was elated when Virginia took action in 2020. That was one of the many reasons that I ran, so that we could have a General Assembly in North Carolina that was more representative of all of the great people of North Carolina, but to ensure that women had the representation that they needed here in North Carolina. I represent a county that is actually predominantly female, and a lot of folks don't know that. And served after 12 years of us not having a woman serve us here in Durham County, and so feel that it's my right, duty, and obligation to continue to push for this. I'm honored to be one of the state senators that will be a primary sponsor of this bill, along with Senator Foushee and Senator Natasha Marcus. So we look forward to continuing to push for its passage. I'm looking forward to the discussion to let all of you know how you can get involved. Before I was elected, I was that individual that would write my legislators and write letters and to visit the General Assembly and to let folks know what it is that I wanted them to do as elected officials. And so we encourage all of you to do the same. Also want to thank the State ERA Alliance for hosting this event. And also for, I know our moderator will also do a great job with that, and one of our other panelists, of reminding people about the breadth and diversity of the ERA. As a woman of color, it is a movement that we do have to remind people that we are still here. We also are excited to push the ERA as well as LGBTQ+. It will provide greater doors and avenues so that they can also be protected. So we're all in this together, and need to continue to build a strong coalition so that we can continue to push forward with it. I pledge to file it every single year until we get it passed here in North Carolina.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. One of my favorite quotes is, "None of us are free until all of us are free." It's 2021, and thank you for all of your work and advocacy on behalf of women and the LGBTQIA community. Senator Van Duyn, I'd like to pose that same question to you. The amendment is ratified by the state. Would you give us your background and your opinion about what's going on in North Carolina as it is in consideration to ERA?
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing such a great job moderating. It's great to have a professional. So I am no longer in the Senate, but I have served for the last 7 years. Very proud to be able to pass the torch to wonderful women like Senator Murdock. For me, obviously equity is a big deal. I agree with your comment. I love that comment that none of us are equal until we all are. Absolutely. But there's a very large economic component to this as well. Women still earn only 83 cents on the dollar, and that's for white women. Black women, Latino women do much worse than that. And so if you wanted an anti-poverty program, the ERA is a great place to start. When women do better, families do better. And I served to bring that, you know, I believe everyone in North Carolina should be able to live their best and fullest lives. That's why I continue to do this. I was thrilled once I left to become part of the ERA-NC Alliance and served as their on their board.
Awesome. And I'd also like to thank you for the work that you've done over the past 7 years and that you continue to do in consortium with Senator Murdock to make sure that all of us really are given, that we take our God-given rights to be equal. And I'd like to also pass that question on to Adrienne Spinner, our other panelist. Would you just give us your thoughts on ERA?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Adrienne Spinner. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm a mom of 2, ages 8 and 5. And I live just outside Greensboro, and I'm serving on the board of directors for the ERA Alliance. It was an honor to be asked to come and speak on why the ERA is important to me. As a Black woman, my rights have always been up for discussion, debate, and litigation. And my fight for equality has always been more difficult because I sit at the intersection of racism and sexism. We have not moved past racial and gender inequality. There has been some progress since previous generations, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we don't have a long way to go. The fight for the 19th Amendment took way too long, and Black women fought alongside white women only to still be restricted after its passage. And it was not until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that women of color across the US could vote without restriction. So now we're in 2021, and I am still looking for me in the US Constitution. I'm still looking for affirmation that my kids, no matter who they are, will have equal rights under the law. And it's a shame that I'm fighting the same fight of women of my mother's generation and my grandmother's generation. And I don't want my daughters having to deal with the fight. So that's why I joined in this work. That's why I freely made a video to post with the ERA Alliance asking the incoming Biden-Harris administration, which finally has someone that looks like me, to solidify the 28th Amendment. But our work is not done after this happens, because the 28th Amendment is just a starting point in the fight for lived equality for all people. So that brings me to this current movement. And in that, I would like to address 2 communities. First, to Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus community. We are a priority in this movement because when it comes to civil rights, we have always received our protections last, if at all then. The focus of my work is to make sure that marginalized communities see ourselves in this movement and change the narrative that white feminism is sufficient, because it isn't. Let's be honest, the women's suffrage movement in the original push of the ERA in the 1970s did not center women of color, even though our labor was a big part of it. There was a general claim that fighting for all women was, the priority. But white feminists often made concessions to appease the white patriarchal system that prevailed in order to remain in proximity to its power. This is shown in the fact that suffragettes like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton worked closely with white supremacist men to discourage Black women from being a huge part of the movement. In the Women's Suffrage Parade of 1913, Alice Paul discouraged Black turnout and Black women from participating. 25 Black women from Howard University, who were the founders of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, fought back for participation. But they were still relegated to the back, and they put white male suffragettes in between them and their white counterparts. And the ERA movement of the 1970s was also not completely inclusive of marginalized communities. This is proven in 1972 when Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run in a major party for president of the United States, and an active supporter of the ERA, attended the Democratic National Convention in Miami in hopes of securing the nomination. Despite the attendance of Democratic women and Black people, two populations that she existed, white women and Black men dismissed her for the most part to publicly support George McGovern as a Democratic nominee, and he still lost. So the dismissal of women of color and the LGBTQ plus community has continued, including at the National Women's Conference in 1977, when leaders pushed back on including gay rights. They referred to this issue as lesbianism, and they pushed back against including it in the feminist agenda. And Black women fought to include the minority women's agenda, which ended up only being included after the Latinx and the Asian American Pacific Islander communities adopted it. And that leads me to the other population I wish to address, to white cisgender women, particularly those who were involved in the feminist movements of yesteryear. This is your opportunity to publicly acknowledge the mistakes of the past and to right the wrongs of historical white-centered feminism. And that is my call to action for you in the many organizations that do this work. I encourage you to connect with generations and organizations that work on racial and gender justice and are led by women of color. Uplift the work of young progressive allies, particularly those of the millennial and Gen Z generations who view social justice issue through an anti-racist lens. Make sure that the leadership in your organization and decision-making bodies have equal representation of BIPOC and LGBTQ plus communities. And if not, you will have to do the work to unpack why and make sure that you evolve into a more diverse group. Be gender inclusive in your language. Encourage others to state their correct pronouns when speaking so that no one is misgendered, and avoid speaking only in binary terms like saying, for example, them instead of he or she, or say friends and colleagues instead of ladies and gentlemen. When you're speaking about the ERA, do acknowledge that the term sex is not sufficient. It honestly should say gender identity. But legally, this term has been deemed broad enough by circuit courts across the country to protect all people, regardless of their gender identity. And finally, in your own lives and families, strive to grow in your own knowledge and cultural competency. Promote racial and gender justice with just as much energy as you do women's rights, and empower future generations to freely be who they are and use their voices to fight for systemic change that leads to a more equal and just world. And I believe someone already mentioned a similar quote, women aren't free until all women and femmes are free. And we need to always operate with the mantra that women of color matter, transgender women matter, and Black women matter. So thank you so much.
Wow, that was powerful, Adrienne. So awesome to hear from you. You gave us not just the history lesson, but I felt the passion. I had an opportunity to watch your video and it resonated. And so thank you for just inspiring us to keep going. And that leads me, you mentioned, the historic perspective, as well as talked about Shirley Chisholm and the years of progress and the process in which we've been fighting. So my next question is for Lori. Would you address the ERA time limit, the passage time limit? There are those who say that it's too late for it to be made a part of the Constitution. Is that true or no? Would you please give us why or why not it is or is not too late to be part of the Constitution?
Thank you, Joy. And thank you, Adrienne. What a very moving message and call to action for all of us. And I am learning, as a friend of mine talked about, the fact that a lot of us older feminists, when we first started fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment, we were all young and dewy complexioned, and we've been doing this for a long time. So it is time, and it's time to be more inclusive. So that's extremely important. Now, the reason this topic keeps coming up about the deadline, when the 27th Amendment was ratified, again, this was amendment proposed by James Madison. So go way back to your history book. We also realized nationally, and these are our legislators, organizations like the ERA Coalition, realized that if you can ratify an amendment 203 years later, that an arbitrary time limit probably is not that big a deal. But the key reason why we don't think the time limit is going to be especially problematic is that the time limit was put into the preamble. States vote on an amendment. They do not vote on a preamble. It's sort of the whereas, the party of the first parts and the party, it's not the actual text. And for the most part, throughout history, they didn't put time limits on amendments. The first time they actually put a time limit on an amendment was for prohibition. And that was not a very popular amendment, if you all will recall your history, when alcohol was outlawed. So the time limit is used, again, very arbitrarily. But the other key point is that one Congress cannot hold another Congress. Back when the ERA was first approved by both House and Senate, they put a time limit of till 1978. We had almost 35 states. They went ahead and Congress, the new Congress, voted to extend the time limit to 1982. So the second Congress could not hold that original Congress. So that's why we do not believe that a time limit is going to be problematic. And we do have resolutions coming up, as I said, January 21st, that would effectively remove the time limit in both the House and the Senate.
That's awesome. And this conversation is so rich. Thank you so much for putting that perspective on it and educating us on the time limit and what that really means. We are a little over our halfway mark in today's virtual Lunch and Learn. I'm here with my esteemed panelists, as well as all supporters of Women in C and ERA Alliance NC. Before we go into some audience questions, I wanted to remind you, if you're tweeting live, you're updating on your social media, please do not forget to tag ERA Alliance NC and Women NC. And we're using the hashtag Women 2021. Our first question is in the chat, and I'll just go, to the top of our chat and ask the question to all panelists. Let's see. Yes. So there's a question about COVID-19 and how it impacts women in the workplace. There are already disparities in the workplace. And this is to all of our panelists, you're welcome just to unmute and we will hear from you in order in which you unmute. Give us your opinion on how COVID-19 and the pandemic furthers the disparity or the gap in the workplace for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think the most recent jobs report says it all. In December, we lost over 100,000 jobs, and all of those jobs lost were of women. And a disproportionate number of those over 100,000 were Black and Latinx women. These are oftentimes women that are single wage households. They are holding down, supporting their entire household with one individual, working multiple jobs. Women of color are more likely to be frontline workers. Even when I work in the General Assembly and the issues we're having with my own colleagues adhering to just very basic CDC guidelines, the vast majority of individuals that clean our chambers are Black and brown people. So COVID has really exacerbated that dynamic. And imagine the strain on your household if you test positive and have to quarantine and don't have paid leave. So we also need paid leave, which is something else that I also advocate for, because it's a huge disruption to a household if you are a single parent, a woman supporting your family and have no other means of income. And unfortunately, oftentimes go to work sick simply because you have to. So I definitely think COVID-19 has really just shed a light on all inequality, but particularly the fact that women earn so much less compared to men, particularly Black and brown women.
And another important aspect is that women still have an inordinately large share of childcare responsibilities. And we have lost as many as 50% of our childcare centers in North Carolina because of COVID. So women have left the workforce, not just because they've lost their job, but because they've lost their childcare. And it will take a Herculean effort that so far I don't believe the legislature has been willing to adequately address, to make sure that we can build back the childcare necessary that we need for our kids to do well in school. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why we need to pay more attention to early childhood development, but also so that women can be free to go back into the workforce if that's what they want to do.
And I'll just add one other thing to this, and it's because this is really great what Senator Murdoch and Senator Van Dyne have said. The AAUW, which is an organization that's been tracking gender equity and the impact of these wage inequalities on women, recently put out a report about the pay gap due to COVID-19. And as Senator Murdoch said, the women's unemployment rate rose by 12.8% compared to 9% for men. But it's really the key is what Senator Van Dyne said about the challenges for women with children. In the third week of July of this year, 32% of unemployed women between the ages of 25 to 44 were not working outside the home due to child care demands, compared to only 12% of men in the same group. And what that really boils down to is the fact that if you're trying to figure out who's going to stay home so that you can do the homeschooling, or your child care is closed, it generally is the spouse or the partner who is not making as much money. And in many, many households, it's the woman. So women now are going backwards, and it will take years and years, maybe decades, for them to catch up.
Wow. Decades to catch up. That's mind-blowing. We have some other questions in the chat, but what I'd like to do is to go to the Q&A function. People have asked questions there as well. And so here is a question from Phyllis Kritza, and any panelist can answer this question. Can you please clarify what National Archivist is or does? Is there a panelist that would like to?
Sure, I'll be happy to. The National Archivist is actually, it is a presidential appointee, but this person certifies, he's sort of the keeper of the records. It's almost like the National Librarian, if you want to think of it that way. But what the National Archivist does is anytime a law is passed, an amendment is passed, they actually are the ones that record it. So for the 28th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment, the National Archivist recorded Nevada's vote to ratify and recorded Illinois' vote to ratify, and should have recorded Virginia's vote to ratify, but was stopped by the Department of Justice, Office of Legal Counsel. But that is the National Archivist's primary role. Again, National Librarian, but also the person that will publish the laws and amendments that are put together by by our Congress and Senate.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Lori. Our next question is, I don't see our Democratic Party supporting Democratic women candidates seeking higher office in the same way they support Democratic male candidates. How do we fix that? Senator Van Dyne, would you like to answer that?
I'd love to answer that.
Okay.
One of the frustrations I have is that women are less likely to contribute either as frequently or as much to political campaigns, to the candidates that they support as men. And so we need to step up and support our candidates. We also need to support organizations like Lillian's List that help women get ready to run and be successful when they do run. And I do want to mention, I am very proud of my caucus. We are now 45% female, not 50 yet, but we're getting close. And not only are we 45% female, but these are wonderful, young, smart, just like Senator Murdoch, amazing legislators. So the future, I think, looks bright, but we can't look at their success and think that we're done. I think that's the problem too many of us have had. We think the ERA is passed already, and it hasn't. And I worry with the Supreme Court that we have now, and particularly a good Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who has said that she is an originalist in the mode of former Justice Antonin Scalia, that we have to be specific about protecting women's rights in our Constitution, because they have said they don't believe that's part of it.
If I could add just really quick to that, the Democratic Party needs a lot of work, a ton of work. I mean, honestly, a full-on overhaul, because there has not been enough attention given to women candidates, particularly Black women candidates and candidates of color. I recall with our upcoming county convention here, the spot for party chair is open. And I have a good friend and a wonderful organizer and activist that was interested in possibly getting involved in the party, and with all of her experience and knowledge, honestly could do an amazing job as chair. When people started asking about her, the first things they talked about was, well, isn't she a mom? Doesn't she have a lot going on? Aren't her kids going to get in the way? And I'm like, that's the same BS that has held women back for generations, using the excuse that our children would somehow prevent us from doing the job and doing it well. I truly believe that we think about so many other populations, as opposed to our male counterparts, who can often be kind of selfish. And also, men are given the opportunity to evolve and change and grow and be better, but women have to come in the gate like already perfect and already being scrutinized. And that's proven by our US Senate race, and the fact that a well-qualified woman was literally pushed to the side by the National Democratic Senatorial Committee. And even though I voted for the Democrat in that race, I'm just going to say Erica Smith was a better candidate. That's it. And I feel like people need to just get some of those preconceived patriarchal biases out of the way and really start to invest in women. Melinda Gates once said, when you invest in women and girls, you're investing in people that invest in everybody. And so when you're uplifting policies that benefit women, then that means that everybody rises, because women and Black women are at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to privilege. And so when we're fighting to rise and when you're enacting policies that benefit us, everyone benefits. So the Democratic Party could use a lot of work, especially at the state level. There are not a lot of women represented in state level leadership, and there's definitely not a lot of Black folks represented in leadership. And we are the folks that are getting these elections won. Look at Arizona and the amount of Latinx women that got that vote out. Look at Georgia and the amount of grassroots efforts that were led by people of color and women of color that got that vote out. We're the dedicated voting bloc that is often ignored. And the longer you're ignored, the longer we're going to see our behinds whooped in these elections. And there are too many amazing women candidates that deserve and would serve our constituencies in amazing ways for us to be ignoring them for mediocre men. So we need to be focused on funding their campaigns. We need to not question their abilities. We need to not focus on their looks and tell them, well, you need a red lip here or a haircut there. Focus on their qualifications, because often the best man for a job is a woman.
Woman. Yes.
Well said, Adrienne. There was a comment, though, I would like to point out, and that is the General Assembly pays so poorly. It
Mhm.
pays about $14,000 a year, and that is not enough for a woman, particularly a woman with children. Not that she can't do the job, but she can't afford childcare. And I think if we were reasonable, maybe set pay at the average teacher salary, that more women, because I agree with you, Adrienne, there are so many qualified women that could do a much better job, but they can't afford, particularly if they live outside of Raleigh. I mean, that's something. I live in Asheville, so I'm in Western North Carolina, probably a little bit more sensitive about this issue, but geographical representation is tough because people can't afford to get involved when it's the pay is so small.
Exactly.
That's a-
Oh, quickly, just wanted to add some highlights in the chat. I did mention, definitely agree with what was stated, but do still want to highlight some of the progress that we are making as we do figure out how to get it right. Just this week, I was on a statewide Zoom. Amy Steele, that ran for the House twice, has actually literally dedicated her life, quit her job, Black woman, to run for office, and refuses to let the 4 years of work be for nothing. And so she's dedicated herself to bringing a fair fight, the way that they had in Georgia, to North Carolina. So we're having a lot of conversations behind the scenes. I am continuing to spearhead African-American leadership work across this state. We're doing the autopsy to see what we got wrong. Spent full-time work doing that while I was a senator towards the end of the last cycle. But when I was elected, I was the only Black woman under 40 to be elected in history. Before me, it was now Senator Sidney Batch, who serves with us. I think she was elected around 40, 41. Deandra Salvador out of Mecklenburg County has bested me, filed for office at 29, is elected at 30. And so even though we are making those advancements, I do have to connect it to the pay. I'm a single woman. I don't have children. Took a pay cut, took a financial sacrifice to run for office because born and raised in North Carolina, have roots here back to slavery, and so felt that sacrifice was worth it to make sure that millennial representation and women of color would have a seat at the table, because we do have a different perspective, being that we are under 40. So even though we're making those gains, we have seen that at the state level, we got it very, very wrong. But I am confident that we've learned from those mistakes. Adrienne hit it dead on. We have grassroots organizations that are doing this work 365 days out of the year. They just need funding. They need to be listened to. And that's what we saw in Georgia, is that when you have women-led, indigenous-led, Black and brown-led, if you listen to what they are saying and put your money into those organizations that have those connections with the community, that is how you really, really can move forward and make those transitions. And I am fully dedicated to doing that work. But thank you so much for the question. We will figure it out in North Carolina. North Carolina's got next. Trust me.
Awesome, awesome. And speaking of which, Senator Murdoch and also Adrian, you mentioned women and girls. I'd like to lift up that Women in C, that is our mission, is to empower the next generation and to advance gender equality in North Carolina. And our vision is to create a world free of gender discrimination. And I believe that once get women and girls engaged in this process, it makes it, a little bit easier to keep that momentum going and keep, women engaged. I'd also like to give another shout out to Maria Ryman, who's our executive director, and Wendy Washberg, who is not only our chair for the board that I sit on, but she also is the director of RTI International Global Center for Women and Gender Studies. I believe when you mention supporting organizations that already are doing the work, those are two, I think, causes. And you can actually go to www.womenNC.org and see the testimonials from the students who have benefited so greatly from what Women in C does with our scholars program. There's also a question, and Lori, I'd like to pass this to you. How do women get involved in ERA Alliance NC?
Thanks, Joy. Boy, I tell you, there's a couple different ways that you can be involved. The first one is we'd love to have you join us. So you can go to era-nc.org. On our website, you can join us. You can sign up for our newsletters. We promise you they're not long. We only send them out monthly or when we have an action item. The other thing that we're going to ask all of you to do, as I mentioned on January 21st, the US House and the US Senate will be posting a resolution to remove the time limit to the ERA. We will ask you to contact your Congress, men and women, and your senators, and ask them to support that resolution. Now, the second thing, in North Carolina, we will also be introducing a bill. As Senator Murdoch mentioned, we're going to be asking you to do the same thing, to call, to write your representatives and ask them to support bringing the Equal Rights Amendment in North Carolina to the floor for a vote. North Carolina did not ratify the 19th Amendment, by the way, until 1971. We need to be on the right side of history. We need to ratify, become the 39th state. We need to show the citizens of North Carolina that we care about our women, about our families, because if you raise women up, you are raising families up. If we could increase pay equity in North Carolina, I mean, the gross national product in North Carolina would be amazing. Our tax base would be better. But it's the right thing to do for our Republicans, for the Democrats, your citizenry. We are 51+% of the population. So bringing the Equal Rights Amendment and ratifying in North Carolina, it's time. I mean, it'll be 100 years.
Wow.
Okay, it's 100 years
Wow.
since women got the right to vote. And in 2023, it'll be 100 years since Alice Paul first introduced the Equal Rights Amendment. How much longer must we wait?
Wow, that's powerful. We had a question in the chat that says, what can we do as citizens? And Lori, I believe you just gave us some powerful things to do on January 21st or by January 21st. I'm going to go through our panelists. We'll start with you, Lori, about some things that we can do right now, in addition to what the great information you just gave us. What should women in North Carolina be doing right now to make a difference?
Well, as I mentioned, again, writing, calling, it does make a difference. Phone calls are registered both in the national, in the US House and Senate, but also locally. Those phone calls with your passionate plea that you are a constituent, those make a difference. Be polite, okay? Don't call them names, be polite, but be firm. And I think the other thing is educate your friends, educate your neighbors, educate your family. I am continually amazed at the number of women and men in this state and across the country that have no idea that women are not fully represented in the US Constitution. They really don't think that. Our new Vice President, Kamala Harris, is not fully represented in the US Constitution. So that's
Wow.
my call to action.
Wow, thank you. And before we go to our next speaker and panelist, there are two quick things I want to also lift up and thank Terry Wiley from ERA Alliance NC for being a part of this planning team and really doing an awesome job. I'd also like to thank Ava at Women NC and Morgan Pratt, Joy Cook PR Group. I've already thanked Maria, but you guys, team stands for together, everyone achieves more. And we definitely are going to achieve more. As we wrap up, the question is, what can women do right now? And there's a question posed to former Senator Van Dyne that says, further, women need to support women online and at local events throughout candidate primary and the general. This is a different issue. Only 24% of Congress is women. Less than 5% of those women have children under 18 years old. So as we close out and talk about what our next steps are, Senator Van Dyne, would you answer that, please?
It's all been said. Call, write, do whatever works for you.
Right.
Advocacy is hard because
Right.
it takes a long time sometimes, but it is the only thing I think that's really going to make a difference. So just keep doing what you're doing and take care of yourself while you're doing it. Don't wear out. We need you all.
Awesome. That's powerful. And now, Adrian, we'll go to you for your final words. What women should be doing?
Yeah, there are quite a few organizations doing this work like ERA NC Alliance, Women NC, AAUW, but there are also folks that do social justice work, racial and gender justice, like Black Lives Matter, like Equality North Carolina, that do the same social justice work. I don't like the fact that folks tend to work in silos when we all kind of want the same thing. We all want lived equality for every North Carolinian, for every American. And so you can get involved with those measures. You can get involved in your Democratic Party and tell them, don't be so hard on a woman candidate that's trying to move up in leadership. Stop playing respectability politics and gatekeeping, because at the end of the day, it's not just older white retirees that can do this work. I'm a mom of 2 young kids. I'm working at home full-time and homeschooling both my kids. My husband works full-time, but I'm still getting stuff. I don't want to start cussing. I'm still getting stuff done, and women get stuff done. We do it well. And so I want women to just realize that however you want to show up in the world, even if it's a little part, if we all do a little part, that will grow exponentially. And don't worry about being the perfect, strong, putting the cape on. Show up as your full, authentic self. Teach your children to show up as their full, authentic self and use their voice. If they don't give you a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair, as Shirley Chisholm said, or set your own damn table, because we're growing in population and we need to start using our voices and supporting each other.
Awesome. And Senator Murdoch, same question.
Yes, absolutely. Just also want to thank everyone for being a part of this discussion and just echo the sentiments of everyone else on this panel. You all have a platform. You all have a very unique worldview. Whatever your challenge is, your struggle is, however you show up every day, that's enough. That's all we need. We need you to bring whatever that very unique perspective is to the table. And I think also when I think about the ERA and just how many years we've been fighting for it, since we are approaching the birthday of Martin Luther King and doing research for a separate project, actually forgot how long it took to even acknowledge him. So they first
Wow.
filed that bill in Congress for it to be a national holiday in 1968. And it wasn't even signed into law until 1983. So I think whatever it is that you're fighting for, just remember, you likely won't get that quick win. It will take decades. One of my favorite quotes from soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Harris is, every generation is fighting to maintain the advances of that previous generation. What we've seen as recently as last week, it could be snatched from you in a second. You cannot
That's right.
sit back and rest on your laurels and say, okay, we got, 1 or 2 bills passed and we can, kind of have a party and celebrate. Whatever it is that you fight for, even when you achieve that, you have to continue to fight to maintain it. And I think also throughout this discussion to continue to educate people about what ERA is, how you can get activated. And as Adrian mentioned, however you come into this work, you have a piece of this. Now you know that LGBTQ plus trans women, very passionate about the plight of Black women that are transgender are murdered at higher rates every single year. This constitutional amendment will assist them in having more rights, having more representation, so that they aren't just othered, so that we don't just act as if we don't care about human beings that are being murdered that don't have equal protection under the law. So would just remind everyone that we have to continue to keep fighting. We have to continue to show up. And you matter. Your voices matter. If you receive 15 to 20 emails about an issue, that elected official is going to pay attention. So it really does not take a lot of individuals to make change. We just had the Hulu special of Phyllis Schlafly, who famously, tried to kill the ERA. And she started off writing letters. She had a little newsletter, writing letters, baking muffins, right? So,
That's right.
And we're still fighting,
That's right.
We kind of got to give it to her. She really, really slowed this movement down, but we're here to right that and to correct that, and to know that you can be an army of one, or you can be an army of 1,000. And so just to continue to push forward and move forward, and to know that you aren't in this alone. And if you want to reach out to me directly, you can reach out to me at natalie.murdoch@ncleg on all social media handles, Natalie4NC. And I do think it was in the chat. I do believe we actually will be filing on the 21st, in addition to that press conference in the General Assembly. So you'll continue to see additional activities and ways to get involved. We're socially distant. We typically have this phenomenal press conference literally in the General Assembly. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year, but what this pandemic has shown us, tweet about it, hashtag about it, get on IG, do a video, however you want to get the word out, let people know that it's not too late. We're going to continue to fight so that North Carolina can join the ranks of Virginia, Nevada, and all these other phenomenal states, and move forward with action right here.
Awesome, awesome. It's time. And my favorite African proverb is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And we are definitely going together. This is the first of many future virtual lunch and learns. On behalf of Women in C and ERA Alliance North Carolina, my name is Joy Cook, and I've been your host today. Thank you to our esteemed panelists, our planning committee, as well as our supporters. I'd love to give a super shout out to Alinda Watkins, who's the North Carolina NAACP Women's Chair, who's also on and took the time to ask some questions in the chat. Please stay connected via social media, as well as the other links that are now in the chat. And on behalf of the organizations that are fighting every day for women and all people of all genders and all races, I thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Do not forget, before January 21st, reach out to your lawmaker. Thank you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Happy MLK Day.